In the womb of the night, the city slept wrapped in a frozen veil of silence and abandonment. The streetlights flickered lazily, like tired eyes that had seen too much and preferred not to witness anything else. Every gust of wind that swept through the empty streets carried the moan of the cold, whistling through the alleys like a dark warning that, on that night, no one would survive without warmth. It was one of those unforgiving winters, ruthless to man, to beast, and even to hope. The kind of cold that doesn't knock, that seeps into your bones and settles in your soul. A winter that swallows sighs and turns every breath of life into fleeting mist in the air. The houses were locked tight, windows sealed, blankets clutched against bodies that had no idea what was happening outside. The world seemed forgotten by God, and on the sidewalks, hard as stone, not even shadows dared to move. But beneath that seemingly sleeping surface, something breathed, something restless, starving, invisible to the eyes of those who had hidden behind walls. There, in the cracks between humanity and oblivion, she walked, silent as the wind itself, a thin, dirty silhouette, paws cracked, eyes darkened by fear and hunger, a stray dog, a wandering soul in the territory of men, a survivor. She had no name, no master, no destination. She knew the shortcuts of pain better than anyone. She knew where to find scraps of food, where barking wasn't welcome, where sandals flew and stones gave chase. She had given birth alone under bridges, buried puppies that hadn't survived, fled from bigger dogs, fast cars, cruel screams. But that particular dawn, she wasn't looking for food. Her instincts told her there was something else, something wrong, something fragile, something alive. Her fur, already sparse, trembled in the icy wind. Still, she walked on. Her nose pointed toward the air as if she could smell destiny itself, and then she stopped, ears perked, eyes alert. A nearly imperceptible sound pierced the silence. A cry, faint, intermittent, human. In the heart of that brutal night, where even the asphalt seemed to moan from the cold, the improbable happened. A homeless dog with no master, no future, had just heard the call of life. Before that frozen dawn, before the cry that tore the night in two, she was already a forgotten figure lost between the cracks of the world. She had no name, though perhaps once she did. She no longer remembered what affection felt like, but her body carried the memory of an ancient touch, distant maybe from when she was still a pup. She had grown up on the fringes of abandonment, among alleys and trash cans, learning that survival was a lonely verb. The city had rejected her so many times that she no longer tried to approach people. She learned to hide before anyone noticed her. It was better that way. For all intents and purposes, she was invisible, and yet something in her had not died. Instinct. The same instinct that helped her find shelter in the most unlikely holes, the same one that made her bury 3 dead puppies with her nose, as if refusing to let the world take them without a farewell. She had been a mother, more than once. And if her body ached from the cold, her chest ached from memory. She wouldn't know how many puppies she had or where they were. Some were taken, others vanished into the night, and some she saw leave right before her eyes. But even after everything, when she heard that human cry carried by the wind, something inside her stirred. Her paws were bleeding from so much walking. She hadn't eaten properly in weeks. Her stomach growled, but it wasn't hunger that moved her that night. It was something deeper, ancestral, as if the cry for life echoing through that dawn wasn't a coincidence, but a reunion. She followed the sound, like one follows the scent of love, and along the way, each step brought a memory. The garbage where she was kicked, the square where she almost died of infection, the yard where she was chased away with sticks, the eyes of the child who once reached out a hand, only to be scolded by the mother. All of this was tattooed on her journey, and still she walked. Why didn't she ignore that sound? Why didn't she hide under a car like she always did when she sensed danger? The answer isn't found in human logic. It lies in instinct. It lies in that thin line between survival and compassion that animals understand better than we do. She walked as if pregnant again, but she carried nothing in her womb. It was in her heart that something pulsed, and that's how she arrived. The cry grew louder. An alleyway, a garbage container, pieces of cardboard and filthy rags, and there among the remnants of a world that throws away even its own children, there he was, a baby, fragile, purple from the cold, trembling with almost imperceptible spasms, a breath of life on the edge of extinction. She approached with her head lowered. She sniffed gently as if she knew that tiny being could vanish at any moment. Then, without hesitation, she lay down beside him, curled up the way she used to with her own pups, covered the baby's body with hers, and stayed there, still, trembling, protecting, fighting against the wind, the ice, the death. That night, she was no longer a stray dog. She was shelter. She was warmth. She was everything that baby had. Time seemed suspended in that frozen alley. There were no cars, no voices, no sirens, no sign that the world still turned beyond that moment. Only the whisper of the wind and the increasingly faint sound of a cry struggling to exist. The dog with dirty matted fur pressed her nose to the soaked blankets and caught the scent of sour milk, sweat, and despair. It wasn't the smell of food, nor of danger, nor of another animal. It was the smell of abandonment, the scent of a life left to rot. The baby could not have been more than a few days old. The skin, thin as rice paper, was nearly blue. Tiny fists clenched instinctively, trying to hold on to the vanishing warmth. Sunken cheeks, half-closed eyes behind the thinnest of lashes. So small, so vulnerable, so incompatible with the brutality of that night. A forgotten human. Someone who shouldn't have been there. Someone that, at some point, someone simply decided to discard. But to her, it didn't matter who had done it. It didn't matter the baby's origin, color, or the reason for his abandonment. That little creature was trembling, and that was enough. With slow movements, as if afraid to startle the tiny being, the dog lay down carefully. She wrapped her arched body around him, pressed her snout against his chest, as if to say, "I'm here," and stayed. Minutes turned into hours. The cold intensified. The dog did not move. Anyone who saw her might have sworn she was frozen, but no. Her eyes blinked slowly, watching everything. And from time to time, she licked the baby's cheeks, trying to stimulate his skin, as she would with a weak puppy. The baby's breathing began to stabilize, still irregular but alive. The dog's body heat, though faint, was enough to stop death from completing its cycle. And there, in a forgotten corner of a city pretending to be at peace, a silent miracle unfolded. No one saw, no one applauded. There were no lights, no witnesses, no cameras, but perhaps the angels stopped to watch. Or maybe even they couldn't believe what they were seeing. A stray dog with nothing, with no one, doing what so many humans had failed to do: protect. The sky began to lighten with a slow gray hue. The sun still hesitated to rise, and the dog remained still, now trembling more from the cold than before. But she did not leave. The baby, unconscious, was still breathing. And in that rhythm between life and death, between human and animal, between abandonment and embrace, the night came to an end. Dawn was finally beginning to dissolve the darkness, but the cold did not yield. On the contrary, it seemed to cling even harder to the streets, as if trying to prevent the day from beginning. Frost covered the rooftops, the parked cars, and even the fallen leaves scattered on the ground. A reverent silence hung over the city, as if everything were mourning something no one knew had happened. But there in that forgotten alley, two lives still resisted. One barely arrived in the world, the other already too battered by it, and between them, the invisible thread of warmth. The dog remained motionless, her body curved like a living shield over the baby. Her legs had stiffened, her ribs trembled in uneven intervals, but even in the face of physical pain, of the cold gnawing at her bones, of the exhaustion threatening to consume her, she did not move away. There was no reasoning there, no logic, only a pure act, a surrender, an instinct as ancient as life itself, to protect the weak. And in that frozen dawn, where everything seemed hostile, warmth was more than physical. It was a gesture, a silent shelter, a breath of humanity coming from a being that wasn't even human. Little by little, the baby's breathing began to change. Once weak, almost imperceptible, it now became more steady. The warmth of the dog's body, combined with her presence, was beginning to make a difference. The baby no longer cried, not from absence of pain, but because of something even newborns can recognize: comfort. Inside that cocoon of bones and fur, he had found something no blanket could offer: a living warmth, a heartbeat, a soul beside his. Morning arrived in shy tones. The world was beginning to stir. The sound of a bakery door opening, a truck passing in the distance. The dog remained steady, as if guarding a sacred secret. Sometimes her eyes would close for a moment, but never completely. She didn't sleep. She watched over, out of instinct, out of memory, out of love, for everything she had never received, but still insisted on giving. And then finally, footsteps. A human presence was approaching. She heard it first, raised her ears, sniffed the air, stayed alert, but unmoving. Whatever was coming, she would face it. She would not leave. She would not abandon the baby, even if it were the last day of her life. It was a man, a baker perhaps, out early to open his shop, as he did every day. He walked quickly, hunched inside his coat, trying to escape the cold, but something made him stop. A muffled sound, a strange shape in the alley. Curious, he stepped closer, and then he saw and froze. For a few seconds, time stopped once more. In front of him, a dog battered by the world cradled a newborn baby with her own body. The man raised a hand to his mouth, unable to speak. He didn't know whether to cry, to run, to shout for help. He just stood there, wide-eyed, in front of a scene he would never forget. And while the world around continued to speed forward, he understood. He was standing before a miracle. For a moment that felt eternal, the man stood frozen, as if the surrounding cold had turned him to stone. His eyes shifted between the figure of the dog and the small body wrapped in filthy cloth curled against her. The scene looked like it had come from an impossible painting, a fable too real to ignore. The contrast was brutal: human abandonment and animal salvation. The misery of the species that gave life and discarded it, and the silent nobility of one who had nothing, yet offered everything she had left. The man approached with slow, cautious steps, like someone entering a sacred temple. At the slightest sudden move, the dog might flee, or worse, react. But she didn't growl, didn't bark. She just looked at him. Her eyes were old, worn, intense. There was no threat in them, only a silent plea. Don't ruin what can still be saved. That mother of another species knew she had done what she could. Now it was the world's turn. He pulled his phone from his pocket, hands trembling from cold and emotion, and dialed emergency services. The words came out in a rush, but filled with genuine urgency. There's a baby here, abandoned, and a dog. She kept him warm all night. Please, send someone now. As he spoke, he knelt down slowly. He watched the dog, observing her every movement. Then, with his heart pounding, he reached out and touched the baby's forehead. It was cold, but there was life. Just enough life to begin again, if they hurried. He removed his own coat and covered them both. Minutes later, minutes that felt like centuries, an ambulance arrived. Red lights cut through the gray morning like visual cries for help. The paramedics stepped out quickly. One knelt down and examined the baby with expert hands. The other looked at the dog with surprise and respect. She didn't move. She didn't bite. She only breathed heavily, her eyes still fixed on the baby, as if waiting for confirmation. Is he going to be okay? The medic nodded. He's weak, but alive. That was enough. The dog lowered her head and finally closed her eyes for a brief moment. It was as if she had surrendered the burden, as if to say, he's yours now. But no one there had the heart to separate them right away. The paramedics placed the baby inside a heated, portable incubator and decided to take the dog too. The baker insisted, she saved his life. She can't stay here. Take them both. It was impossible to separate them. Not anymore. They were now two sides of the same story. That very day, the city woke up differently. The news spread like wildfire through a dry field. The local radio was the first to report. Stray dog saves abandoned baby from the cold. Within hours, newspapers, TV channels, and social media were repeating the headline. Photos began to circulate. The dog curled up beside the baby. The emotional rescue. Those eyes that said everything without a word. People cried, shared, commented. And for the first time in a long while, that city, so used to ignoring its pain, stopped to listen to a story of salvation. She was taken to a temporary shelter where she received veterinary care. She was dehydrated, malnourished, with old wounds scattered across her body, but alive. The baby was admitted to the neonatal ICU. He underwent tests, was given a temporary name, Miguel, and his story was recorded at the hospital as a miracle. No relatives appeared, no clues to his origin. Just a cowardly abandonment, followed by a heroic act. And while the world began to be moved by that story, she, the dog, still had no name. But that was about to change. What began as a local news story crossed borders like a beam of light through stormy clouds. On social media, the story spread with a speed no algorithm could predict. Nameless dog saves abandoned baby from the cruelest cold of the year. Within hours, the internet was overcome with emotion. Influencers, journalists, celebrities, and ordinary people shared the image of the dog curled over the baby as a symbol of purity, of instinct, of compassion beyond reason. It was impossible not to be moved, impossible not to stop and reflect. The small town where it all happened became the epicenter of a rare wave of solidarity. The shelter that had taken in the dog began receiving calls from all over the country. People wanted to adopt, to donate, to help. But there was one detail no one knew. She didn't let anyone come near her easily. She reacted with fear, not aggression. She growled softly, fled from touch, curled up in a corner. Her eyes, still alert, seemed to ask each new face, "Where is the baby?" Meanwhile, Miguel, as the baby had been named at the hospital, remained under medical care. Reports indicated a surprising recovery. Doctors said that had he spent just 20 more minutes exposed to that night's cold, he would have died from hypothermia. It was the constant presence of a warm body that kept him alive, said the specialists. But what none of them could explain was the bond that began to form. When the dog arrived at the hospital, quietly brought in by one of the paramedics who refused to leave her behind, something magical happened. Miguel, until then resting deeply, fragile, unresponsive, moved his arms with strength when he caught her scent in the air. His heart rate accelerated, his eyes opened, and a soft sound, almost a smile, escaped his lips. The medical team exchanged silent glances. It was as if he had recognized his mother, or rather, his salvation. And it was in that moment that the press captured the image that would mark history. The baby and the dog, together again, eyes locked. The photograph traveled across the country, crossed oceans, and appeared in international headlines. A homeless dog protected what the world had thrown away. The instinct that saved a life. The four-legged heroine. The emotion was real. People lined up to adopt her. Some even offered money, cars, houses, but the shelter refused everything. They knew she didn't belong to anyone. She chose, and she had already chosen. Meanwhile, a family who had waited for years in the adoption queue for a newborn followed the entire story in silence. They were simple people, no fame, no riches, but with a record of true love. When they learned the baby was healthy and no relatives had been identified, they contacted the juvenile court, and they surprised everyone with an unusual request. They wanted to adopt the baby, and also the dog. They belong together, they said. We can't separate what life united through so much pain and love. A legal process was required. Hearings, reports, psychological evaluations. But the judge, deeply moved by all he had seen and heard, made his decision. Miguel and the dog would be adopted together, as an inseparable family. And that same day, beside her new family, she finally received a name. Luz. A simple name, yet one that held the exact meaning of what she had been that night. A light against the cold. A light against abandonment. A light that, even coming from the darkness, shone as only true heroes do. Time passed as miracles do, slowly but leaving marks. Miguel grew under the loving care of his new family, surrounded by affection, security, and warmth. He was a calm baby, with curious eyes and an easy smile, but there was something about his behavior that caught everyone's attention. He only slept deeply when he felt Luz nearby. It didn't matter the crib, the lap, the quiet of the room. If she wasn't around, his sleep was restless, as if his subconscious still carried memories of cold, loneliness, and danger. But the moment she lay beside the crib, or her soft breathing filled the room, the baby would finally rest in peace. It was as if his soul recognized in that rhythm the beat of survival. Luz, in turn, blossomed. Under the family's care, she gained weight, strength, and for the first time, rest. But what impressed the most was her devotion to the boy. She wasn't just a pet. She was more than that. She was a sentinel, a guardian, a mother. When Miguel began to crawl, Luz followed him patiently, never letting him get too close to corners or stairs. When he started to take his first steps, it was her he leaned on, And when he began to babble his first words, it wasn't mommy or daddy, he said, but something between Lou and Zoo. His world began with her. The neighbors knew the story. Over time, the media stopped hovering around the house, but the legend had already taken root. "That's the dog who saved the baby," they'd say with reverence. Children from the neighborhood would ask to see Luce, and she, with the serene temperament of someone who has lived too much to be in a hurry, watched them with gentle eyes, never straying far from Miguel. With every step he took in the garden, she was inches away. With every laugh, every fall, every tear, the family never separated them. On trips, Luce came along. On Miguel's first birthday, she was there, wearing a makeshift party hat and a place of honor at the table. There was cake, guests, and many photos. But the most memorable moment of that celebration came when Miguel, during the birthday song, crawled over to Luce, hugged her neck and fell asleep against her, just as he had on that cold night. The photo, taken without planning, began circulating online again and reignited the emotion of those who had followed the story, a cycle repeating itself, not as trauma, but as a bond. As the years went by, the dog aged with dignity. Her fur began to gray, her breath shortened on walks, and her once vibrant eyes took on a calmer glow, as if preparing for rest. But even so, her protective instinct remained unshaken. Each night, she slept at the foot of Miguel's bed. Each morning, she was there when he opened his eyes. And then one day came the silence, a different kind of silence. Not the frozen silence of the night it all began, but a warm, sunlit silence, filled with memories. Luce didn't get up that morning. She was lying down peacefully as if asleep. Miguel, now nearly 7, noticed. He approached with the gentleness of someone who already knew what had happened, even if he didn't fully understand. He sat beside her. He didn't cry right away. He simply stroked her snout and said, "Thank you, my Luce." The family buried Luce in the garden beneath a tree she loved. They planted flowers around her and placed a small plaque. "Here rests the guardian of the boy she saved." For days, neighbors, friends, and even strangers came by to pay tribute. Letters, notes, drawings. One child left a paper with crooked letters. She was magic, and indeed she was, because the magic Luce performed was not only saving a life, it was staying. It was being the bridge between two forgotten worlds, the human and the instinctive. It was proving with every silent gesture that true bonds don't depend on species or blood, but on presence, on warmth, on soul. The years passed as the seasons do, slowly but relentlessly. Miguel grew up. The baby features gave way to the curious face of a boy who carried in his eyes a quiet wisdom, the kind not taught in books or schools. It was as if he had inherited more than protection that frozen night, as if, in the warmth of Luce's body, he had absorbed the depth of a love that transcends language. At 9 years old, Miguel already knew how to tell his story, not with rehearsed words, but with the naturalness of someone who lived a miracle without needing to fully understand it. At school, when asked to draw his family, he never forgot to include a brown dog with kind eyes and wide paws. His classmates would ask, "But isn't she dead?" And he, calm and certain, would reply, "She didn't die. She became part of who I am." There was truth in that phrase, a truth more powerful than any photograph or certificate, because Luce wasn't just a memory, she was presence. She was compass. She was the voice Miguel heard in silence when the world felt confusing. She was the warmth he felt at night, even with no one lying at the foot of his bed. She was the invisible act of protection still following him when he crossed the street, when he cried in secret, when he smiled at the sky without knowing why. The family kept Luce's corner in the garden like a living sanctuary. The aged wooden plaque received fresh flowers every week, Miguel insisted. He said it wasn't about sadness, it was about gratitude. And every year, on the same day it all began, the family came together to remember. Not with candles, but with gestures. They donated blankets to animal shelters, wrote letters to rescue organizations, visited kennels. It was their way of keeping the flame alive, the one Luce had lit that night, because the cold of that day was just the backdrop. What truly mattered was what was born there, a bond. Miguel never feared the night. On the contrary, he liked the dark. He said the silence of the early hours was a place where important things happened, a space where hearts found each other. And whenever the cold returned, he remembered, not with pain, but with reverence, like someone who knows that some moments mark the soul with embers that never fade, a silent embrace, an instinctive gesture, a mutual rescue, because deep down, Luce didn't just save the baby that night, she saved herself, and all of us who heard her story, and the world, even so distracted and indifferent, did not forget her. On a mural in the city, they painted her face beside Miguel's, a piece of urban art that over time became a meeting point, a place for visits, selfies, and reflection. Tourists stopped to hear the story, locals told it with pride, and children asked their parents, why did she do it? And the answer, always with a lump in the throat, was almost always the same, because she knew what love was, even if she never received enough of it. Luce, the stray dog with no name, no home, nothing, became eternal, not through the media or awards or tributes, but because, in the deepest sense of existence, she did what few beings are capable of. She gave what the world had taken from her: love, care, life. There are questions that cross the centuries unanswered, yet they continue to pierce us from within like invisible splinters. One of them, perhaps the most uncomfortable, perhaps the most urgent, perhaps the most human, is this: what, after all, makes us human? Is it language, consciousness, reason, or is it our mistakes, our weaknesses, our abyss, and our attempts at redemption? Perhaps, just perhaps, the answer lies far beyond words, hidden in the gestures we make when no one is watching, in the silences we offer when someone needs to be held, or, as happened on a cold and anonymous night, in the fragile, dirty body of a stray dog who chose to give everything to a being who could offer nothing in return. It is easy to be human when everything is fine, when there is shelter, warmth, safety. But what truly defines us is who we are when faced with abandonment, with frailty, with someone else's silence. And it was there, in that very space between misery and miracle, that a nameless dog showed the world what it really means to be human. She didn't think. She didn't plan. She didn't hesitate. She simply felt. A fragile cry, a body far too small to endure the world's cold, and she lay down, curled up, gave warmth with her body and her soul. And that was enough. It wasn't instinct. It was presence. It was surrender. It was raw compassion. And that says more about humanity than 1,000 philosophical treatises ever could. Luce, who lived without a name, without a home, without rights, transformed the fate of a baby society had thrown away, and in doing so, reminded us that compassion doesn't need pedigree, that love needs no explanation, that salvation sometimes comes from where we least expect it. She had no surname, no title, no voice or speech, but she spoke, through her actions, through her presence, through the warmth of her body conquering the cold of human indifference. The world is full of grand stories told aloud, but some of the deepest ones are whispered, and this was one of them. The story of a dog who in the darkest hour of the night refused to look away, who made her body a shelter, who gave life back to someone who had been denied the right to live. And maybe in the end, one does not need to be human to teach humanity. Maybe all we need to do is observe more, listen more, feel more, and always remember that those with the least may have the most to give, that true heroes don't wear capes or uniforms or crowns. Sometimes they walk on 4 legs, covered in scars, with tired eyes, but a heart still burning bright, like Luce,